if you look at Florida State, and I don't know their preference, I'm not saying that I'm sitting in the president's office, but the Big Ten wants to, quote unquote, expand their footprint. I'm sure you've heard that term more times than you can throw it out. What do you think with Florida? I just want your take, and then I'm going to kind of go into what some of the fans told me. Do you think that it's a mistake? Because culturally, Florida State does not fit the Big Ten at all.
Yeah, it is. The AAU status, we want you to be a nerd school and a powerhouse, right. And Nebraska not being AAU being an issue for the Big Ten makes that issue one that's fairly prominent. And the SEC and Greg Sankey have been clear, at least publicly, that they want to hold where they are, sit on it. They're not interested. Brett McMurphy reported neither the SEC or the Big Ten are likely to pursue Florida State as a candidate. Immediately, people started pointing and laughing and saying, well, that's because Florida State doesn't play nice. That's because they want to come in and be the big dog. They don't want to negotiate. They think that they are worth more than they actually are. And I'm not sure if that truly is the case. Florida State is one of those programs, and there are only about a dozen of them in the country that could suck for 5-10 years and still bring expansion value. Here's an example. 15 years ago, would you rather have Virginia Tech or Clemson if you were going to add a team to your conference? The answer is Virginia Tech. At that point in time, this is 2008, 2009, Clemson has less football revenue on average than Bowling Green. They sucked. And when they sucked, nobody really wanted them. Nobody really cared. Then you go to that Orange Bowl, and Dabo Swinney picks up speed, college football playoffs and championships. A decade of winning will make anyone a Clemson. But I can promise you this, a decade of losing will turn Clemson right back into Virginia Tech. That is not the case for Florida State. They can go 10 tough years, the same as a Texas, the same as virtually an Oklahoma or an Auburn or an LSU. They can go 10 years and still be valuable. With that in mind, they bring enough for the SEC or the Big Ten to at least get something out of them. The reason I believe that Florida State fans would want to be in the Big Ten is because, let's be honest with ourselves, the SEC is a different beast. Texas walked in and had to give up the Longhorn Network and immediately became the fake UT. Tennessee got the UT, and horns down became the official symbol of the conference. If Florida State walks in tomorrow, you're going to get bullied on your way. You can't be the big dog. They don't want you to be. You're going to put up with the LSUs, the Auburns, the Alabamas. In the Big Ten, Florida State comes in day one and already has respect because they would be automatically a top 3 brand in that league, and they would not be that in the SEC.
I think that LSU, Alabama, Georgia are the 3 tradition-rich SEC programs, just from dealing with all their fans.
Yeah.
That they could all be very annoying. I live in Alabama. Trust me. I know about one of them in particular. But LSU, et cetera, they could all be that way. Now you had Texas and Oklahoma, 2 crazy fan bases. These people don't like each other. From going back and looking at my podcast, I think one of the reasons that some of the fans on my site would rather go. They just hate the SEC fans.
Yeah,
they do. Clemson's brand is crazy because they have such a rich history, but they did what Florida is doing now. It is hard to screw up Florida, but the Gators are doing a good job of that right now. It is really hard. Clemson screwed it up for a long time too, but their fan base is nuts. I knew they would come back eventually, but that's interesting. It's Virginia Tech should never be consistently better than Clemson, by the way, but they were for a while.
They were, yeah.
It's so wild. Great stat, by the way, on Bowling Green. Here's my take. Florida State, I don't buy any of the public stuff that I'd highly doubt you do either, any AD says, oh, we're not interested in Florida State. Right. If anybody buys for a second that the Big Ten and the SEC is not at least interested, there's some swampland in South Alabama that I have available. It is for you. So, look, this is pretty simple. It depends on the price tag. There's that word again, money. And 2, based on the stuff we're hearing, NC State, Louisville, it's about partnering to make it work. Give you an example. When the ACC, they continuously tried to court Notre Dame, do you think it's coincidence they took Stanford? Do you know the backstory on that?
Oh, yeah. 100%.
They want Notre Dame. Notre Dame wants Stanford because they play them every year. They want to count it as a conference game if they ever did it. If they would have said, we want Cal Poly, I know ACC fans don't like that. It's just the way it is. That brand is different. Cal Poly would have been in the ACC. So if Florida State could take Clemson, especially if they could take Carolina, because the Big Ten wants the basketball.
Yep.
Different deal. Who are you going to put with it? It is a package. So my curiosity with you, I think the Big 12 is as good, if not better, basketball league as there is. Would you say Carolina or Clemson is the bigger draw if you're the Big 10? I say Carolina because of the hoops. They're good at football, but I go Carolina because of hoops.
Yeah, if you look at EADA numbers in the last 2 decades, the school that is going to consistently make more money is actually North Carolina. And they have the AAU status to back it up. It's a nerd school. I went there. This has nothing to do with realignment. I went there 2 months ago. The bar scene sucked. There was nobody just looking around. It's a bunch of nerds. It's like, what are we doing here, guys? Can we just have a little fun and loosen up for a second? And I thought, this is Big Ten country. This is exactly what that conference is looking for, is the nerd school that is good at basketball Michael Jordan, Dean Smith, to Roy Williams. They have the pedigree. 10 years of bad basketball at North Carolina. They still have the Jordan brand. Michael Jordan still went there and is still pouring money into that university and their athletic department. Clemson, who's their big donor alum? Who's their big athlete? We always know that Clemson's going to have a deal with Nike. No, we don't. Oh, they always got Adidas in their back. That's not really how North Carolina is built in. Win or lose, they are built in for the rest of time. They can suck, but still afford to suck. Clemson can't afford to suck. Long term, the Big Ten wants a North Carolina or even a Virginia over a Clemson.
Basketball school.
And that's how much they value both basketball and the nerd aspect, education.
Yeah, Virginia, for those who don't know, you could make the argument based on academics, is the best public institution in the country. It's in the conversation. Carolina's on that quasi level as well. And yes, I grew up in Big Ten country. That matters a lot to them. It's an arrogant discussion, one that I have no interest in, but that's the other point beyond basketball. Before we get ready to wrap up here in a few minutes, here's my question to you. If you're Louisville, NC State, one of the quote unquote, and I know they won't like this term, but it's just true for football, one of the tier 2 teams in the ACC, who are you trying to? North Carolina is obvious. I think they're number one because of basketball and the Jordan brand. Right. You stole my line. I 100% agree. Who would you try to align yourself with? Would it be Florida State or Miami, and why? Because the Big Ten, like if you're trying to get into the Big Ten, they want to be in Florida. Which one do you think is more valuable? I went back and forth on this.
Well, I think from a Big Ten standpoint, you certainly want Florida State. And from the standpoint of the SEC, if you had to pick between the Florida State and Miami, the Big 12, I think the Big 12 is in a much better spot to land in Miami because Florida State's shooting for the moon. Shoot for the moon, Florida State, land in the stars, Miami. Reason being, Miami fan base, they don't show up for a damn thing. There's nothing. Coral Gables does not give you a football culture. Let's go back pre-Howard Schnellenberger when they really, really sucked. Your gifted, legendary Hall of Fame coaches in Jimmy Johnson or Howard Schnellenberger who win at the highest levels, and the gap years there aren't good. It's not a fruitful long-term football program. And you could argue, oh, yes, it is. I point to the last 2 decades. This is a school that's kind of Clemson reversed, right? Again, 15 years ago, give me Miami. 20 years ago, Miami is head over heels better than Clemson in every expansion conversation. But what they did is they were bad for 20 years in a state that has 2 powers like Florida and Florida State. And in that area, you can't do it. You can't afford to suck for that long. Miami has, and it's put them way behind.
The only thing that I even put them in the conversation for is the market. Yeah, I spent a lot of time down there. The oodles of money will help them because the advertising dollars, even for what we do, any sites I've dealt with that have money, the money's higher because there's just so many rich people. Otherwise, everything Drake just said is 1,000,000% true. We're going to wrap up the show here in just a second, talking about not just Florida State, Big 12, but I'm curious about a few takes with what he thinks about the Big 12 this year and why teams, Florida State or otherwise, should be interested in joining. You can pick whatever school you want, but I mean, that's your turf. I'm going to let you kind of have it. That's next here on the crossover between Locked On, Big 12 and Seminoles.